Hey friends, this is the lesson 2 recap. At the start of the lesson we had this application with the rock and the houses, and the rock was like going back and forth, and our goal in this lesson was to add a player character and have a character controller so that not everything runs automatically, but that we can control this thing ourselves. And I'll go through a quick recap on what I did and how we can quickly solve this problem. Okay, so there are a few things. I'm starting with the scene with the ground and the rock and the houses. But what I will do at the first thing is I will actually create a layer, a background layer, and um, actually not here, this layer, but it's a sprite layer. And we can go to the sprite renderers. And here we see those sorting layers. And what I'll do is I'll click on add layer as I did. So I'll go over that again. Go to any sprite, look at the sorting layers, add a layer. And then I can, for example, add the background layer here. Now it's saved. And I will put that layer up above the default layer. So, and have that on the house. So let's have a look what happens now if in my house prefab, open the prefab, and in here I set the sorting layer of those two things to the background. And if we have a look, what happens now? We see our rock is now always in front. So what happens in Unity is that the layers get drawn sequentially, and since the background layer is above in the order above the default layer, now first the background layer gets drawn and then everything that's on the default layer gets drawn. So this is a very handy thing for us to create a background. Okay, but we also wanted to have a player. So what I do now is delete the rock. We don't need the rock anymore. We want to have a player. And for that player, I'm just gonna create an empty game object and call that one player. And this empty game object, I'll also reset the transform so that it's at the position 0, 0, 0. And this will be representing our player position. So very important, as we did with the houses where we had this empty and then the visual components of the houses, I also do the same with the player. I create an empty game object of the player, and I will now, as a second step, add something to the player, which is the visual representation of the player, and I will create a capsule for that. So I just call this one visuals, and we now have these capsule visuals. But in my opinion, this capsule is a bit big, so I'll scale it down, and I'll actually scale it down to a third. So 0.33 of all of those things. But as we see, it's now also at the ground, and that's not where I want it to be. I want it to be at the bottom. So what I can do is I'll see, okay, this is at 0, 0, 0, but I want the bottom of this capsule be on 0, 0, 0. So I'll just move it up by the 0.33 as well. And now we have a capsule that's at the bottom, and that will be our player. And just for good measure, I'll make the player a bright magenta pink so that it is easy for me to see the player when it is running around. Okay, great. So now I have a player game object and I have the visuals for the player game object, but if I start this game now, not a lot is happening. Actually, nothing is happening. So the first thing I want to add is some physics. So, and to do that, I'll go to the player now. So very important, not to the visual representation of the player, but to the player game object. And I'll add a new component. And the component I will add is called a rigid body 2D. Very important, there is two types of rigid bodies in Unity. One is the rigid body for 3D applications, but since we're in a 2D application, we need the rigid body 2D. And I'll add that one to this component. And then there is a second thing we need for physics to work, which is actually a collision. So I add a capsule collider, which is a very good collider if you create a 2D character. And since I right now have a capsule, it should be very easy for me to create a correct one. So I created this capsule collider, I wanted a rigid body. But I still have some problems. The capsule collider right now is really big. If I click on the edit collider, you see this is where the capsule collider actually is, and this is where the visual representation is. So if I now move up my player and I start the game, you'll immediately see what the problem is. Actually, you don't. It just falls down and there is nothing there. But I can also add a box collider to our floor. So this is a collider now. If we look what happens now, we see we fall down and suddenly our player is in the air and everything is a little bit off. That is because this capsule collider is actually here. So this is where our player is, and the visuals is just where the player is painted at. So we want this to be kind of the same. And to do that, we can, for example, just click on these buttons. So if I click this 3-point thingy here next to the edit collider, and I just move those things around, I can just like make this shape kind of fit what I wanted it to be. And a trick I often do is I then look at those values and I see, okay, this is very close to 0, so this is probably supposed to be 0, right? And this, that's 1/3, and I set it to 0.33 before, so let's do that as well. The size as well, and how tall is it? It's twice as tall as it is wide, so that's 0.66. And right now I actually have a perfect collider for my player. And let's see what happens now. Amazing. We fall down and we are now on the ground, but I'm pressing some buttons, nothing happens, nothing is moving, but we already have some physics. That's basically what we wanted. Okay, since we have a player now, which has some physics, it's time that we control how this player moves. And I'll show you how to do that. So everything we want to do right now is we want to do it on the player, and we want to add an input system here. And we are using the new input system, or just called input system in Unity now, but in the version of Unity 2022 3.35 we're using, that one is not installed yet. So we need to first install it via the package manager. So we go to the package manager, window, package manager, and we're here, and I'll go from packages from in project to Unity registry to just find all the packages that exist. And in the search bar, top right here, I'll now look for input, and it shows me the input system. That is the package I want to handle my inputs. And I'll just click the install button and it will now install the package. And I'll be back with you in the video once I'm done installing the package. This can take a while depending on your internet connection. Okay, we're back. And after installing, you get this cool warning that you need to restart the editor to enable the new input system. And we want to do that. So we click yes here and restart the editor to get everything set up. I'll save my changes because I want to keep them. And now I'll wait until my Unity project is back up. Should only take a few seconds, but could take a little bit longer on your system. I'll be back once I'm done. And I'm back. Great. So the input system is now installed. We should have everything ready, but of course nothing happens yet. So what I want to do is actually add some input to my player. So important, always click on the player, not just click on the visuals. And here we now can say input. And what we want is a player input. Okay. So this player input component can like refer to an input action set asset. It's like a special asset in Unity that we can use to define what keys and what inputs do what, and then send that to anything else that is also on that component. Right now we don't have any actions, so we will just click this create actions button, to get some. And I'll create a new folder, which I'll call input actions. I'll go into the folder, and in here, I'll just create the 2dga.input actions file. This is the file for Unity to like set up everything. And it comes with a lot of things already done, which I do not want for now. So I'll just like get all of those and always click the save asset button. Now we have a player action map with actually nothing in there. Okay, so, and during the first, our lecture, the first action we added was some jumping. So I'll quickly go over how we did that. During class, it took a little bit longer, I know, but I'll just go through the quick speed run through of how to do that. So, clicking the plus button, we can add an action, which I'll call jump, right? And I'll make sure this action type here on the right side is a button action, because I just want to press a button and then I want my character to jump. And I'll need a binding. The binding is the key that we need to press for that action to get called and to like get enacted. So right now I have a binding here and we don't have a path. And remember, this is like this weird overlay menu that does not really work. But here on the left side, if you click here, it's listening for the buttons you want to have. And I want my jump to be on the space key. So I press the space bar and now I click on space keyboard. And this is now the button for that action. And I'll now save my asset. And I'll close this for now. And what we see here, on the right side, we now have this 2D GA input action asset, and it's set to send messages, which is the way we want to use right now. And here we can see all the messages, and this jump action that I added, this on jump, is now in here, which means, great, I can actually use the key to like do something on jump, and I'll show you right away how to do that. And to do that, we need a custom component. So it's coding time again. I still have like this move back and forth and move right scripts in there. I don't need them right now. I'm just gonna create a character controller script. So, or actually, I'll call it player controller. Generate a new component, call it player controller, and I'll open it up in my rider. It is here. Rider is there. There's my new thing, and to make it like everything clean, I just delete everything I don't need right now. And let's walk through how I did this. Okay, well, I have my script here, and we have something in an action called jump here, and we saw here the send message will send on jump to the game object. And how we can actually do that is if we create a function called on jump on any component. I make it a void function on jump on any component that is attached to the game object that also has the player input. That thing can get called whenever we press the button. So for now, I'll just like do a quick log that loads jump. Let's see what happens now. Go away OBS, back to Unity. Here I am. I started, I press the button, click in it, and nothing happens. Okay, that means I did something wrong. Rookie mistake. Took me a minute or two to see what is actually happening. Rookie mistake, of course. It can't work if we don't add the component. So here, go to the add component button, add my new component, which I called player controller, and let's see what happens now. Click in here, I press the spacebar, and we see jump gets logged, meaning somehow I made a connection, and whenever I press the space bar, the jump function gets called. Cool. So now what we want to do is actually do something on here, right? And the thing that we want to do is we want to move upwards once we press the spacebar. And I'll show you how to do that. To do that, we will use the rigid body that we attached. So, 1 second, back to Unity. We have this rigid body 2D thing. And this thing, we can set velocities to, and we can add forces onto it to like make it move around and to change the behavior. And the way we will add the jumping for now is by setting the velocity. So, but that means I need a reference to this rigid body first. To do that, I will create a field, and it is amazingly already telling me what I actually want to do. I want the rigid body 2D. Maybe I will not call it rigid body 2D, that's a long name. I just call it RB for now. And I'll create an onStart function, which is not called start. OnStart, it's called start. So I have the start function in there, so meaning this gets executed before the first frame. And in here, I'll say, okay, I want the RB, and I'll know I have a rigid body 2D component. So thank you, Ryder, already telling me what I want to do. So I'll just want to capture the reference to the rigid body in this variable up here. And that is basically all we need to do right now for that. And then in the onJump, instead of locking jump, this one wants to do it with add force. I'll just do it with velocity right now. And I say, okay, the velocity, it stays the same on the x-axis. And here I'll set it to the jump force or jump speed. And jump speed is not defined, but I can make jump speed a field that we can define by creating a serialized field, calling it private float, not move speed. I want a jump speed. And I think during class we figured out that 8 is a sensible default value for that. And we have it. So let's see what happens now. Go back to Unity. We have the player here. We now have a jump speed here that's set to 8. And if I press the play button, start the game, and I press space, we jump. Okay, maybe that's a bit much, but you see what's happening for now. Great, so we can jump, and I can, for example, set this to 5 to make it less intense, the jumping. Now we have it on 5. And this is a value you can like play around with a little bit to like find whatever value you want in your game. But now pressing jump, you can also probably hear my keyboard makes us jump. Amazing. So, but we don't only want it to jump, we also implemented some movement in our game. So let's do that next. So pay attention, now it gets a little bit more complicated. Not very complicated, just a little bit more complicated. We want our action map back, so I can get that, for example, by double-clicking on the player input component to go back here. And now I want the move, or movement, I call it movement for now, a movement action. But this action, I don't want it to be just a button, because I don't want to have the button that is moving, but I want to have actually a value in there. So in here, I'll just set this one to be a value, and then not having a button value, but put an axis there. So now we can get a value, a floating point value that tells us how strong is that value currently set. And by adding a special kind of binding, so I'll delete this binding and click the plus button here, and adding a positive negative binding, I can get this axis. I'll also call it axis. So, and now I can like define this. Okay, this is a 1D axis and it goes from -1 to +1. Amazing. None of the sides win. That's also good. And what I do now is I can set here the button that adds to the negative component of this, and here the button that adds to the positive components. negative now in our sense. Remember, x is right in Unity, and so a minus component would move to the left. So if I set the button I want to press to move to the left here, for example, the left arrow key, and the right arrow key on the positive component, I now have a negative component for the left arrow key, a positive component on the right arrow key. I can get a value that changes. And that is basically solving for us the problem on where we should move. So now let's look at it. In the Unity editor once more, you see there's now this on movement thing, meaning we can also get some code for on movement. So no longer do we only have this, we also have on movement. Right, and now this is actually an input value. Here we had it without any arguments, this method. But here we want some argument, and the argument we want is the value of the axis that we just got. So I will call, we can create a function that has an input value and call it value for now. And in here, we now want to get the direction that we're pressing. And as you can see, this is suggesting us to get a vector 2, but actually we don't want a vector 2. Remember, we set it to a one-dimensional axis, so that's a floating point. So what I'll create is a float move direction, and in our value we have to get the float now. So I can just say get float and get whatever floating point value comes out of there with this function. And for now, I'll just debug it and debug log it. And let's have a look what happens now if I set everything up correctly. So back to the editor. Come on, here I am. Let's start the game. Let's look at our console, and I press the button, and you can see I press the right button. Now it sets to 1. I leave it, it goes to 0. I press the left button, it's on -1 now. I press the right button, it's on 0 because it doesn't really know. So -1 plus 1 is 0. And we have an input that changes and is either -1, 0, or 1. So what can we do with that? Actually, a lot of the things that we want to do. Because we can now set this value, right? We get a change of this value. We can also store this value in our class. So I can say the private float, the current movement direction, and I'll just be explicit about it. I initialize it to 0. It always does that for a float, but we say, okay, it starts at 0. Then here, instead of just logging something and storing it something, I can say I store it in this field that I have up here. So in my class field, I just say current movement direction is that value. And now on movement, I don't locally change something in this function, but I change it in the in here. And now there's a last thing that we need to do. We can also read what it says here, and we'll do that in the update function. So we have a start function and we have an update function. And during the first lesson, we learned how to move something in the update function. And we just now, in the update function, will read this value and use that to move our character around. So I'll create the update function. It is here. And now I'll do the following thing. We have this RB, right? And the RB has a velocity that we can set. So I can also set the velocity here to be a new vector 2. That's correct. But the new vector 2 here, I want to have the current movement direction. Now, remember, this one is either 0, 1, or -1. So I want this to be the direction we move in, and then I want the move speed. So we have the jump speed here. I'll create another field, I'll call it move speed. Thank you, AI. I don't want the gravity. Don't you love it when the AI just tells you whatever? I want the move speed. So here, the input, it's either 1, -1, or 0. Multiply that one with the move speed. So set the velocity on the x-axis, and the y-axis velocity should just stay the same. So I'll just say, okay, please be the same. Amazing. And let's go back to our game. Let's see what happened now. I press the right button, I press the left button, I move, I can jump, but I can also fall over. So what happened here? We set some velocities to our body, so it topples over, which can be funny, but right now I don't want that. But there's a pretty easy fix. I just need to freeze the rotation here. So in the rigid body 2D, I can click the freeze rotation button, and then it does no longer rotate around the Z-axis. And for us, that is actually perfect. It is what we want. So, and we have our endless jumping player, but we didn't get to how to solve that one during class, so I might show you later. That's all for the lesson 2 recap. So, should be a pretty short one. We can move, we have some input actions, we can jump. And I also, in this video, I think I didn't show you that during class, we created the background layer so that our player is always in front. During the next class, we will add some actually frame-by-frame animation to that and create some collectibles. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping also you're looking forward to that. But yeah, let's see you next class. I hope this helps.